Edward and Dr. Disraeli Hutton, Professor Disraeli Hutton. And we have, of course, our guest speaker, Dr. Carol Hordatt Gentles, and she's supported by her family. We have with us Custis Hugh Gentles, her husband, and we have two of her sons. So welcome. And I especially want to welcome, in addition to that, all the heads of departments that I see in the audience and former School of Education lecturers and senior lecturers and staff. And of course, those in that lovely brown, light brown, dark brown uniform from St. Joseph Teachers College. We are really happy to have you. You are the future. And for those online, I know there are many of our School of Education students who are listening online. So welcome, everyone. So we're going to have greetings. We're going to have greetings first from Dr. Dion Edwards-Carr, the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education. And then she'll be followed by Professor Carmel Roof, who is the Director of the School of Education, and they'll bring greetings. And then I'll come up once more.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is really absolutely lovely to be in this room this evening. I mean, the faces of the SOE continue to shine, and grateful that you're here. I want to acknowledge the presence of our guests, Right Honorable Peter Phillips, Custis Gentles and family, and of course, the most Honorable Errol Miller in the room, and our representative from the JTC, Howard Isaacs, the doctor, right? Also want to acknowledge Dr. Paul Ivey here as well. So I greet you on behalf of the Faculty of Humanities and Education this evening and welcome you to the Biennial Errol Miller Lecture. And for us, this is a signature event. Right? It has a very meaningful tradition as well. This year's topic on teacher education, legacy, global imperatives, and the indigenization of Caribbean education. Actually, for us here in the FHE, and particularly in the School of Education, brings us to a critical point of reflection. We are taking, we have and we continue, and is now accelerating, the business of teacher education, the transformation of teacher education, very, very importantly. How do we honor, for example, where we come from? How do we respond to this rapidly changing world? It's a globalized world, but also changing in the geopolitics. How do we honor that? And how do we ensure that our teachers are prepared to educate our children in a culturally grounded and responsive way? And this is a critical question for us, because we have to be able to develop pedagogies that fit in with our socio-historical and socio-cultural frameworks. Tonight, we want to shine a bright light on the remarkable contributions of Dr. Carol Hordatt Gentles, whose visionary work in teacher education challenges us to rethink, reimagine, and recenter the Caribbean experience in our teacher education training systems. Her scholarship has been instrumental in strengthening teacher identity, advancing school leadership research, and promoting culturally responsive pedagogies. Through her work on policy development, teacher professionalism, and curriculum transformation in teacher ed, Dr. Hordatt Gentles has provided the region with frameworks that help us balance legacy, balance global best practice and good practice, and the preservation of our own cultural and indigenous knowledge systems. Our gathering is also an homage to Professor Errol Miller, whose pioneering research on gender and equity and access in Caribbean education reshaped how we understand social forces and how they influence schooling. His groundbreaking texts, including Marginalization of the Black Male and Men at Risk, sparkled national and regional dialogue that continues to influence policy researchers like me. As a former dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education and a transformative educational leader, Professor Miller helped embed the principles of equity, cultural pride, and educational transformation at the heart of this faculty's work. His legacy continues to drive our mission to produce educators who are culturally aware, globally competent, and committed to the transformation of our Caribbean society. So, as we face a rapidly changing educational landscape, tonight's reflections are not only relevant, they are necessary. Thank you for joining us in this very important journey of thought, memory, and forward-looking inquiry. Ladies and gentlemen.
I didn't think I was that tall. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I remember presenting at the Michael Manley conference, and the Honorable Dr. Peter Phillips asked me a couple questions. And I was like, it doesn't get any better than this. But this evening, really and truly, it doesn't get any better than this. When you're in a room with colleagues, scholars, who at some point on your journey you thought were out of your reach, and now you're interacting with them, it really doesn't get any better than this. So with that, I just say welcome, everyone, and I hope that you will enjoy the lecture. For me, this is a huge legacy lecture. And as I prepared to share a couple remarks, my thoughts went, Professor Miller, to Apostle Paul's analogy. His analogy of the Christian life. And I know you're a man of the Bible. And so you won't mind me drawing on some of the Christian principles. And Apostle Paul likened the Christian life as a race to be run with purpose, discipline, and focus on an eternal prize, a prize beyond ourselves. And so as I thought about Professor Errol Miller, I thought about how he has ran his race and is still running the race, but perhaps at a slower speed. Not really, somebody said. And you're perhaps correct, because when I came to the post of director in August, we had a conversation and he told me about the several books and papers that he's still working on and the contribution that he's still making to schools. So you're perhaps correct. He has not slowed down, maybe only the steps. I want to also think about his work, and I'll just mention a few. Through the Joint Board of Teacher Education, work with the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, the establishment of the Joint Board of Teacher Education Foundation, his work with the International Council on Teacher Education, schools in Jamaica, and in particular his alma mater, Calabar High School, because I know he has a project currently working on for that school. And I'm just mentioning a few when I spoke earlier about his several publications that would have inspired us. When you think about just those few things that I've mentioned, and we could spend the entire lecture just talking about his work, you cannot help but say that this is someone, a human, whose research, teaching, and service has been with purpose, discipline, and focus beyond self. And I think that is important. And it's an important takeaway for all of us, that as we teach, And as the youngsters are here who are hoping to continue this legacy, that we think about service, teaching, and research beyond ourselves. Each time we host this lecture, therefore, it should really serve as a reminder to us that we must lead with purpose beyond self, because we have to, at some point, hand over the baton to another set of leaders. As I think about Dr. Hordatt Gentles, who is said to be recently retired, and I'm saying said to be, she has worked with Professor Miller, and she has paved a path of excellence in teacher education. And I really see this as a demonstration of this legacy that has come through the School of Education and through, in particular, Professor Miller's work. And so we are honored this evening, Dr. Gentles, to have you as our guest lecturer. Thank you for saying yes, because we felt this was a must. We have chosen the theme, Teacher Education, Legacy, Global Imperatives, and Indigenization of Caribbean Education, as a reminder of our call to action regarding the work that we must continue to do in education, and more specifically in teacher education. The theme is a reminder that we are building a legacy beyond ourselves, that we are members of a global community within which our teaching, research, and service must occur. But while we do this, the theme also reminds us that we are Caribbean people. And so our legacy in teacher education, or research and service in teacher education, must also be balanced with Caribbean ways of knowing and doing. That's important. As a School of Education at the UWI-Mona, we aim to be responsive to what I'm calling our global work in teacher education. And so we have been responding even in the aftermath of the recent Hurricane Melissa by providing support to our students who are teachers in training, but not just teachers in training, school leaders, principals, vice principals. We also have provided care packages to schools and to our students and to parents who support these students. And this is both at the undergraduate and graduate levels. We see our contribution to this effort as very important. And so if you are here as I speak, we have some students who have said to us they're not sure if they'll be able to continue their education because of the financial challenges as a result of the hurricane. So if you're here with some money and you want to give, we have some tuition that we could pay for next semester and even part payment for this semester. And I see some St. Joseph students down there saying, me, me, me. So the need is great. But we are not just thinking about the students who are within our care to offer education to as the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa. We are also providing support to schools under a theme that we have generated, schools as catalysts for hope, resilience, and renewal in communities, where through individual and collective efforts of students and staff, we are seeking to help the population we serve recover from the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa. And so we have provided psychosocial support to school leaders, parents, students. We have provided stationaries to schools, and plans are ahead for partnerships with universities overseas as well. And we see this as important because this is part of the response to preparing the next set of leaders, the next set of educators. So colleagues, the legacy building continues through many of us sitting in this room and online. The work continues to prepare the next cadre of educators for leading national and regional development, and to continue our advocacy for the work that we must do to improve the lives of everyone. May you be inspired by the thoughts that our lecturer will share this evening. May you be inspired beyond yourselves. The School of Education is very proud of you, Dr. Hordatt Gentles, and proud of the legacy we have been building on, of the great leaders who have passed through the School of Education, who have not just promoted their work individually, but who have sought to contribute to national and regional development, and that is very important to us. So may all of us be inspired. Enjoy the lecture, everyone.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Director. And we're going to have the introduction of the guest speaker by Mr. Howard Isaacs. He is the principal of the Monaig College. Not yet the JTC president. I hope they're not here. But maybe it's in the future. All right, so please welcome up, and then right after Dr. Hordatt Gentles, you can come and lecture away.
Thank you very much. In fact, I served as the president of the Jamaica Teachers Association back in the days, and I follow in the footsteps of the great Honorable Errol Miller. And I am so honored this evening to stand here to present our keynote speaker. I thought about what I would say, Dr. Gentles, as I present you to the colleagues and those who are online this evening. And I said to myself, back in the day, we would say that when you introduce somebody, you'd always use the phrase or the term, the president, and everybody would just simply, but in the context of what's happening now, maybe we'll not do that in relationship to that. But we'll just acknowledge that you, in your own right, Dr. Gentles, will come in a room. I've sat in rooms in Brazil, in all over North America, where you have presented at conferences, and your presence and what you share made a difference. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my distinct honor to introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Carol Hordatt Gentles, a scholar, educator, leader, and advocate whose work has shaped teacher education across the Caribbean and beyond. Dr. Gentles holds a PhD in curriculum teaching and learning in teacher education from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. She has also earned an MPhil in educational psychology, a diploma in education specializing in geography and social studies from the University of the West Indies, Mona, and a BA in psychology from York University in Canada. As was mentioned, she recently retired from the School of Education at UW Mona after an exceptional 22 years of service, during which she also served as a Deputy Dean in the Faculty of Humanities and Education. Her leadership extended to the editorial sphere as Chief Editor of the Caribbean Journal of Education, now the Caribbean Journal of Education and Development, and as Program Coordinator for the MA in Teacher Education and Teacher Development. A recognized teacher education and teacher development specialist, Dr. Gentles has consulted with major international agencies, including USAID, the World Bank, and UNESCO, as well as ministries of education in Grenada, St. Kitts, and Nevis, the Bahamas. Plus, she has also worked significantly with the Jamaica Teachers Association over many years. She's a former chairperson of the Joint Board of Teacher Education and has contributed her expertise as an external examiner for teaching practice across Jamaica, Belize, and the Cayman Islands. Dr. Hordatt Gentles is a prolific scholar, having produced 34 publications, 11 technical reports, and presented at over 40 conferences worldwide. Her research on qualitative research pedagogy and her incisive work in Caribbean teacher education has positioned her as a leading voice for critical caring pedagogy, a transformative approach aimed at evaluating the quality of teaching in the tertiary sector. She has delivered 11 keynote addresses locally, regionally, and internationally. Her service extends to local, national, and international boards, including the University Council of Jamaica, the Advisory Board for Undergraduate Studies at the University of Technology, the Grace Kennedy Foundation, International Council on Education for Teaching, ICET, and the Low River Junior High School Board. She sits on that board. She now serves as president of the ICET, where she co-leads the International Teachers Task Force thematic group on inclusion and equity in teacher policy and practices. Under her leadership, ICET launched the ICET Mesh Teacher Voice series, producing its first global report. Listen to this, producing its first global report, capturing teachers' experiences across 40 countries during the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Hordatt Gentles. Come on, you can clap her. Began her journey. When I first met her, I thought she came from Scotland, actually. But then I realized that she began her journey in Trinidad, where she attended St. Joseph Convent, St. Joseph, and taught at Providence Girls Catholic High School. She moved to Jamaica when something great happened in 1984 after marrying her husband, Custos Hugh Gentles, and has made Jamaica her home for the past 40 years. She is a proud mother of 3 and the grandmother of 3, I can talk to it, relate to it, exceptional grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming a scholar of profound influence, a champion for teachers who give teachers a whole lot of second chance. I won't tell you what. An enduring contributor to Caribbean education, Dr. Carol Hordatt Gentles. Welcome, everyone.
And I need to mention that it serves Mr. Isaacs well to have done a good job, because he's also my doctoral student. And so there's a lot of water under that bridge. But thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. Thank you. So I really want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. When I was coming in, I said to my son, Andrew, I feel like I'm going to get married. I don't know why. And then when Yewande talked about there's not that many people on that side, but more on this, that wedding sort of analogy came back into my head, you know. But anyway, thank you all of you for coming. So I want to start by thanking, very important, I forgot my glasses. There we go, much better. Okay, so I want to start by thanking the School of Education for inviting me to speak this evening. I consider this a great honor and a full circle moment, and let me explain why. When I first started working at the SOE, I came on as a member of faculty for the Institute of Education, which was one of the departments in the School of Education. I just earned my PhD, and I was absolutely awestruck to discover that my new office on the first floor was right next to Professor Miller's office. As a newly minted academic in the field of teacher education, I had spent many hours reading through Prof. Miller's publications about teacher education and teacher development in the Caribbean. Now suddenly we were colleagues. I was really intimidated. But I soon came to realize that Prof. Miller was more than a great scholar. He was also an exemplary educator. He epitomized the ideal of a teacher who was excited about helping others to learn and mentoring them. He was so down to earth and approachable, and always willing to share his ideas with you. He retired shortly after I arrived, but I was privileged a few years later to work closely with him on a consultancy project for the Grenadian government. He also accepted an invitation to be the keynote speaker for the 60th World Assembly of the International Council on Education for Teaching, for which I was the conference chair and which was staged here in Kingston. We were eager to showcase the intellectual talent of our Caribbean scholars at this international gathering. And of course, he did not disappoint. He gave the most brilliant address, and we were really proud. But what stands out most in my memory is the evening that he came out of his office. I'm Prof, you probably don't even remember this. And he was chatting about the PESP program, which was, the talk of the day, and the revisions that we had been making to the professional studies curriculum for the Teachers College. And during the conversation, he said to me, you know that we handpick faculty, the ones that we invite to the Institute of Education, because we want to make sure that they understand what needs to be done to support teacher education. So he was throwing me a challenge. No pressure, no pressure. In the 23 years since then, I've tried to live up to this expectation. So being asked to speak about teacher education a few months after retiring for this Errol Miller Biennial Lecture in front of Prof. Miller is really a full circle moment. I feel really proud, and I hope, sir, that you will feel proud at the end of this as well. Okay, here we go. Let's see if this works. Thank you. Okay. All right. So before I start the actual lecture, I've observed at conferences that in countries where people have what they call indigenous peoples, that public speeches are always prefaced by a few words to honor and acknowledge them. They talk about the tribe of, I stand on their land, etc., etc. But I thought it might be fitting to adopt this practice, to customize it as part of how I speak to the notions of legacy and indigenization of Caribbean education. My interpretation of indigenization is that it's the process by which indigenous ways of knowing, being, doing, and relating are incorporated into educational, organizational, cultural, and social structures of institutions. I see it as intertwined with the work around decolonization. So for me, the concept speaks to how past scholars in the School of Education have, through their research and writing, produced a rich knowledge base about teacher education in Jamaica and the Caribbean, building a legacy of proud and rigorous scholarship that I and other teacher education scholars who came after have benefited from with great pride. And so before I begin my actual lecture, I just want to acknowledge their legacy by naming them. So we have Professor Errol Miller, Professor Hyacinth Evans, Professor Zelene Jennings, Professor Beverly Bryan, Professor John Figaro, came a long time before me, Dr. Ruby King, Professor Aubrey Phillips, and I need to speak about him a little because his son Peter is here, the relationship is close because he's my husband's first cousin, and I understand that Uncle Aubrey, as we called him, was also Prof. Miller's supervisor. Am I correct? Right. So this is a lot of full circle moments happening here, right? So I also want to, and he counseled me a lot when I first came here, so I owe a lot to his memory. Then we had Dr. Rose Davis, Dr. Marcia Stewart, Dr. Lorna Down, Professor Disraeli Hutton, and Dr. Marceline Collins Figaro, who we need to acknowledge as pioneers in their distinctive fields of specialization around teacher education. And we have some aspiring and budding scholars here who will be part of this legacy, who are becoming like Professor Carmel Roof and Dr. Edwards Carr, who are making great contributions. So the topic I've been asked to speak about this evening, it's broad, but as we've already heard, really important. Teacher education, legacy, global imperatives, and indigenization of Caribbean education. Now, it's a topic that one could speak to easily for many hours, but obviously I have a time limitation. But I hope I'm not disappointing anyone because I'm going to focus mainly on the Jamaican experience, because when I thought about this deeply, I don't think indigenization as we understand it here is quite the same as it is in other Caribbean islands. So it would just be too much to speak to. So I will say the Caribbean, but I'm really focusing on the Jamaican experience. And so as I thought about what I wanted to say, I decided I'm going to organize the ideas I want to share in response to these key questions. Oh, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. There we go. Okay. So why is it important that we think and talk about teacher education? What is hindering meaningful change towards a quality teacher education sector? What challenges do we have to address as we change teaching and teacher education in Jamaica? And finally, given the contextual realities of teacher education in Jamaica, what are the possibilities? What are the real possibilities for meaningful and sustained reform of how we do teacher ed? Let me just explain briefly for those of us who are laypersons what we mean when we say teacher education. We're talking about the policies, procedures, provision, and practices that we design and deliver to equip prospective pre-service teachers with the knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, competencies, values, dispositions that we think they need to deliver high-quality learning to students in classrooms, in schools, and the wider community. And having gone through a teacher education program should lead you to become professionally certified so that you can teach in classrooms. It also, to me, refers to the provision of ongoing in-service opportunities for continuous professional learning and development throughout a teacher's entire career. Because we now know, and we now adhere to the view that teachers continue to learn throughout their whole careers. They don't just go to teachers' college, learn, certified, and then they know everything they have to. So teacher education has really evolved in terms of thinking of it as teacher preparation for a teacher throughout their whole career. And currently we have 18 institutions offering teacher education in Jamaica, including our universities and our publicly funded teachers' colleges. So let's turn now to the topic at hand. Okay, so in 2021, the Jamaica Education Transformation Commission's report on the reform of education in Jamaica delivered a heartbreaking verdict on the state of the education sector. In the report, led by Professor Orlando Patterson, it was concluded that although Jamaica spends a fifth of its national budget on education, it has failed to educate a majority of children. It faces an administrative crisis of organizational and strategic incoherence, redundancy, and unaccountability, leading to chronic inefficiency. Really, really harsh words. It goes on to say, although the great majority of its children have access to primary and secondary schooling, Jamaica has a severe learning crisis, in that a majority of students at the end of primary school remain illiterate and innumerate, and most leave secondary school with no marketable skills. The report recognizes that teaching constitutes the most important element of the education system, and so it says that the priority focus in fixing the problem must be to improve teaching that will help to improve performance outcomes linked to improved learning. But the problem, according to the Commission, is that Jamaica's teaching profession is still too committed to a traditional teacher-centered method of instruction aimed at passive students, which discourages learning. And it calls for a radical shift towards learner-centered, collaborative pedagogy by teachers who are flexible and can engage students as they enact a dynamically relevant curriculum. So for those of you who are not familiar with the teacher education lingo, right now this is a very teacher-centric experience, because I'm sitting here and I'm lecturing away and I'm expecting you to sit there passively. I'm hoping your minds are working, but this is traditional and teacher-centric. Now, for those of us in the field of teacher education, that report was even more heartbreaking, because we were very deeply concerned when we read that the report concluded that a strong contributing factor to the failure of our education system might be weaknesses in the training of our teachers, and thus their capacity to deliver quality teaching. And that the report said the effectiveness of initial teacher education or pre-service education in producing quality teachers in Jamaica has been weak, with the implication that this has contributed to our failure to educate at the most basic level a substantial proportion of our children, and is responsible for the tepid economic performance over the past half-century, related chronic social problems, and our learning crisis. This is a very, very bitter pill that we were asked to swallow. I think we've, sorry, the slides have disappeared. Am I to touch? Oh, I think I got it. Okay. No, not, there we go. Oh. All right. Okay, so the recommendations of the Patterson report, and I mean, oh, here we go. No. There we are. I'm not going to read them out, but the recommendations that it offers for addressing these challenges, they're sound and they're aligned with what we know about best practices for preparing quality teachers from our reading of the literature, both local and foreign, and from global recommendations on policies for improving teacher quality. Thankfully, in response to the recommendations, the ministry has convened a teacher training oversight committee to work with stakeholders in teacher education to establish standards for teacher educators and to develop strategies to transform teacher education in Jamaica. Now, this is encouraging, but the reality is that we've been here before. It sounds very familiar. It's like déjà vu. A review of the changing landscape of teacher education that I did with one of our new and bright scholars in teacher education, Tashane. A review of this landscape over the last 50 years suggests a series of successive reforms in the organization and governance of teacher education, curriculum, upskilling of those delivering teacher education, college lecturers, and teacher educators has happened, but yet not as much has changed. The Patterson report made reference to the 2004 task force. The report came out just after I started at the School of Ed, and we were hopeful and excited. And they made many valuable recommendations, one of which was to upgrade the professional certification requirement for teachers from a 3-year diploma to a 4-year degree. That was done, but very little else. And as a matter of fact, the Patterson report concludes that many valuable recommendations were made towards improving the teaching profession, but most of them were largely neglected or failed to make an impact. This is really frustrating and very disappointing. Even though successive governments will say that they have invested in building and subsidizing publicly funded teacher education institutions, and they have partnered with UE and various agencies to ensure quality assurance, and they have supported developing new curricula for teacher education, and they have supported upgrading qualifications, the qualifications required to certify our teachers. As a matter of fact, many of our teacher educators do now have a doctoral degree, which is good. But in spite of all of this, Jamaica, teacher education in Jamaica still seems to be a weak intervention in the successful preparation of teachers who can offer quality teaching in our schools. And the question we have to ask ourselves here is why? Why is this so? What has hindered our ability to develop a quality teacher education sector? And I'm going to share with you 2 possible factors. Sorry about that. Okay. The first of which is quite obvious, is that even though the government subsidizes the functioning of our teacher education institutions, the teachers' colleges, and contributes to, in universities and other education institutions, which by extension helps to support teacher education. Most of our educational institutions are still underfunded, hindered by bureaucracy. Many of our teachers' colleges have buildings and are in states of great disrepair. They have to find money from elsewhere in order to improve the conditions in which student teachers learn. One very, very shocking finding by the Patterson report was that many of our teachers' colleges do not have science labs that are up to standard. Some of the science labs are lower in standard than what we find in high schools. And so how can we ask teacher educators to adequately prepare science teachers to go out into our schools to teach science if they don't have access to a basic thing like a science lab? A second factor is, as I have suggested in some of my research and publications, is that there are certain ideologies held by teacher educators and teachers that are stifling their capacity for change. So this notion of ideology is explained by Peter McLaren as a way of viewing the world. When we talk about ideologies, we're talking about the ideas, various types of social practices, rituals, representations that we tend to accept as natural and common sense. McLaren suggests that one way we can effect change is to look at the ideologies that inform the way we think and practice, and that we can do these by critiquing them, interrogating them, and deconstructing them to make room for new ideologies that will better suit the purposes that we have, the outcomes that we want. So drawing from my research where I've used the lens of critical pedagogy, I've theorized that there are some deeply entrenched post-colonial ideologies still held by teacher educators and teachers that lead them to privilege the use of traditional teacher-centric practices over the use of learner-centered constructive collaborative teaching. These lingering ideologies also reinforce their reluctance to challenge what exists or to advocate for change to the status quo. This is one contributing factor to our failure to make the paradigm shift from authoritarian-style teaching to learner-centered pedagogy. And I see many people looking at the slides and wondering, I'm not seeing what she's saying, but, this is part of my plan here to move away from the teacher-centeredness. So everything I'm saying is not on the slides. They're little teasers, so just to make that clear, But because I want to go back to that old-fashioned style of lecturing where we listen and just, not only look. But to explain further, critical pedagogy, it's an educational philosophy and a social movement that advocates for combining education with social activism to challenge and change power structures and inequality in society. I found it very useful for thinking about teacher education because it advocates that we must encourage students and teachers to think critically about social, political, and economic oppression and to develop a critical consciousness that can help to empower them to effect change. Critical pedagogy proposes that we should see teachers as transformative intellectuals, something we should be aspiring to with our own teacher education. Teachers who can change that Freirean banking model of education, where teachers just passively deposit knowledge into students, and it advocates instead for active dialogical learning. So this process of ideology critique helps us to figure out what are the tacit messages that are embodied in the day-to-day practices that teachers engage in. And the relationships with students. This helps us to uncover the repressive ideas that these ideologies serve. So let me just offer two examples. So some teacher educators subscribe to what I call an ideology of benevolent utilitarianism. This is their view and belief that while the purpose of teacher education is to help students to become teachers, there are teacher educators who believe that teacher education is also there to cater to helping the disadvantaged, students from poor backgrounds, many of whom are the first to attend a tertiary institution. So many teacher educators see it as a duty, and they're committed to helping these students to succeed regardless of what stands in their way. But what happens sometimes is that student teachers, maybe whose matriculation grades are not up to scratch, who are finding it difficult to pass their courses, whose personalities are not ideally suitable for the classroom, are still allowed to be professionally certified because their teacher educators believe they deserve a chance. You know, we have that saying in Jamaica, every man must get a food. It's pervasive, it's there, it's part of how we think. Now, teacher educators I've spoken to have expressed that there's a lot of tension that exists around these decisions that they make, because they're torn on the one hand between wanting to help their students get a degree, and on the other hand, they want to make sure that the candidates they graduate are fit for the purpose of teaching. So this reality raises questions about the efficacy and reliability of teacher education as a producer of quality teachers. This perspective is grounded in the narrative that has dominated our thinking about the role and purpose of education and teacher education ever since independence in 1962. At that time, the belief was that independence should bring social justice for a population who for 300 years had been stripped of their humanity. Access to schooling was seen as the means by which the poorer classes could find redress for historically imposed social and economic imbalances. As Miller 2017 pointed out, teacher education, particularly the teachers' colleges, have historically been seen as the poor man's university. Graduation from a teacher education program has long been seen as a stepping stone to a career beyond that of teaching. Teacher education, as Miller tells us, has been the supplier of trained personnel for almost every occupation in Jamaica that requires educated personnel. As thousands of trained teachers, Jamaicans and those who have come from other parts of the Caribbean to do teacher education here, they graduated, that they left teaching for opportunities that opened up locally and abroad. Now, while it is an accomplishment and speaks to the significant contribution and legacy of teacher education in our national and regional development, what I want you to realize is that recruitment of students into teacher education programs is not the same as recruiting them into the teaching profession. Thus, while teacher education has been doing a lot of good, it hasn't always been fulfilling its intended purpose to produce quality teachers in the way that we expect it to. Another ideology, which I call an authoritarian and bureaucratic ideology, is dominant and pervasive, and it stifles the efforts of teacher educators to move away from traditional teacher-centered teaching. And this, I suggest, is rooted in our experiences of teacher training in the colonial and early post-colonial eras. After emancipation, teacher training institutions, we call them normal schools, were established, and these were to facilitate the production of local teachers drawn from the population of ex-slaves, primarily so that they could teach the children of the ex-slaves. I see what I'm doing here now. The children of the ex-slaves to read and write enough to be able to engage with their Bible, to attend church, etc. I've gone far ahead. Sorry about that. What are we? Okay, sorry about that. Okay. But there really wasn't an intention with these teacher training institutions at that time to develop educated teachers as we know them today. Teacher education at that time was really more a form of training to develop trainees into morally upright Christian citizens who knew their subordinate place in society and who could impart the same values to their pupils. Greater emphasis was placed on ensuring the high moral character of teacher trainees rather than on their intellectual development. And as Turner 1987 tells us, candidates entering colleges for teacher training were seen as persons who needed to be reformed from the character they had acquired in lower class Jamaican society. They were seen as candidates who needed to be civilized, who needed to be upgraded from the depraved, uncontrolled state in which they were. They were people who lacked social graces. So at that time, teacher education was organized to ensure the teacher trainees' unquestioning acceptance of the values of those in authority. Teacher education was designed to produce a cadre of colonial subjects, more British than the British, who accepted the values of those in authority without question. Teachers at that time, they weren't socialized to have a voice. They had no autonomy or agency, and they certainly were not considered professionals. And for those of us who are nodding here, it's kind of still very much the same, eh? Anyway, the remnants of this experience of marginalization and oppression are, I suggest, still evident in how our teachers and teacher educators today are not actively socialized to have a voice or a sense of agency. I think it explains what I've always called that warrior syndrome of our Jamaican educators, who continue to teach even when conditions for quality teaching and learning are missing. But I think this supports the persistence of teacher-centric practice because they have a lack of, they don't have a sense of agency over their own work environment. They just feel there's really nothing I can do, I just have to go on and do what I can. But this lack of agency stifles any attempt at creativity or a commitment to do things differently. And so teachers who want to change, particularly our beginning teachers who go into the classrooms with zeal and enthusiasm, after a while, there's sort of like a state of helplessness because they lack the resources, they don't have the support, and they lose their motivation to change in the face of everything they have to do, limited resources, the pressure to help their students pass exams. So they simply continue to do what is less difficult, use teacher-centered methods, because there's no motivation or support to change. So, having talked about, sort of historically what some of the challenges are, what are the real challenges that we face for reforming teacher education in Jamaica? What has hindered successful change? First of all, I'm going to try and get to my slides here so I can, sorry. It's a bit difficult doing the double thing, but, okay. So, one of the problems that we have, and I hope I'm not offending my colleagues here, is that I feel that our teacher educators are not adequately prepared. Many of the teacher educators that I know and treasure, I know are caring, committed people who want to do a good job, who value the work that they do to prepare teachers for the future. But I don't think that they have the benefit of being properly prepared for the work that we're expecting them to do. I think, therefore, they're not ready to take on the work of change, of helping teachers to change. Many of them currently struggle to provide that quality teacher education because very few of our teacher educators receive formal preparation or professional certification or mentorship. So what happens is that they come from an experience of being taught in teacher-centric ways. They've never seen any other kind of teaching modeled. So when they go into teacher education as teacher educators, they have no model, nobody tells them what they should do, and so they end up teaching in the same way that they were taught. So that cycle of teacher-centeredness continues. I also think that our teacher educators are being asked to do things that they don't always have the skills and competencies to do. For example, to develop curricula. Developing curriculum, as Professor Roof will know, who's our expert in curriculum, is not something easy. You need certain skills and competencies. So it's very unfair sometimes to ask them to do the work of curriculum development. And as I said, they don't have the skills to model quality teaching because they themselves have never had the benefit of having it modeled to them. As a result, teacher educators do not enjoy a high professional status. We know and we recognize them as professionals who work hard, who are really committed to the jobs that they have to do. But to the average layperson out there, teacher educators, it's not a profession. Most people have no idea. They don't even know what a teacher educator is. They think it's as a teacher, but there's a very distinct difference between the work of teaching elementary, primary, and high school teachers and the work of teaching teachers. There's specific skills and competencies that we need to do that job properly. And our teacher educators, there's no professional standards to guide them. The scope of their work is often broad, very demanding, poorly defined. And as a result, they themselves do not feel comfortable with or practice the sort of advocacy, professional autonomy, or agency that can give them that sense of ownership over curriculum changes in teacher education. Oh, sorry. Let me see what I can. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so if we think about what is to come, as we think about what do we do to provide a better quality of teacher education in the future, we need to think about what the challenges are going to be. And one of the challenges is this new buzzword in this global discourse about education, future-proofing. We're being asked to future-proof teacher education. That means that we have to think about helping our teachers and helping ourselves to acquire knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary to continue to learn in a stable and enduring way in what is a frighteningly, rapidly changing world. The teacher educators they have to think about educating new teachers for a future world, but a future world that none of us we don't know what it's going to be. We don't understand it. We can't anticipate it. We can't describe it. That's a really difficult task. Every day you see new things. Yesterday on the TV, I saw Elon Musk floating around on two, shoes that were boosting him all over the place. That kind of world, we don't know how to prepare ourselves and our student teachers for that. And even more difficult is now we have this concept of the future-proofed child, very different from the child that we are thinking of preparing. So the OECD global voice has produced this Learning Compass 2030. Sorry, you can't see it very well, but it paints a picture of this amazing child who has things like, a sense of agency, has a sense of co-agency with their parents and their teachers. They have cognitive and metacognitive skills like critical thinking, creative thinking, learning to learn and self-regulation, social and emotional skills. They have empathy, self-efficacy, responsibility, and collaboration. Practical and physical skills. They know AI. They know how to use tools. They can be adapt easily. They're interested in lifelong learning. They're resilient. They're resourceful. When I think about that type of child compared to the one where, you just want them to learn their ABCs, totally out of whack with, right. But the thing is that these organizations like the OECD and UNESCO and, Educational International, they're powerful organizations that make their print and sort of say, this is what we need to be looking towards. So this is a stress, because how are we ever going to create children like that? We are just worried about, did they learn their tables? Did they learn the alphabet? Do they know, do they know what stalactites and stalagmites are? That's how we're thinking. So the other thing too that is in the future, teacher educators have to think about preparing teachers to be ready for any crisis. And we're so aware of that today because with the passage of the terrible Hurricane Melissa, which wreaked just unprecedented damage and created a situation for which none of us were prepared. We realized that the climate change crisis is real. We survived the pandemic, the global pandemic, and we felt good about ourselves in the education sector and the teacher education sector because we figured out very quickly how to move teaching and learning online. We've been figuring out now how do we prepare our teachers to teach online. And whenever there's a problem, the government says, okay, schools can close, but that's okay. Everybody's going to learn online today. Well, with Hurricane Melissa, the infrastructure was shattered. There was no light, there was no power, there was no connectivity. So how do we prepare teachers to work around that? How do we prepare them to counsel the children who are traumatized by what happened? So a lot to think about. And of course, we have the advent of artificial intelligence, which none of us even thought about 10 years ago. It just wasn't in our frame of thinking. But these are realities that we're going to have to contend with as we think about how we're going to shape teacher education in the future. But let us also remember that our teacher educators in Jamaica and across the Caribbean still have to think about the very real basic challenges. They have to prepare teachers for the real world in Jamaica and the Caribbean, despite all the challenges. They have to know how to deal with the physical, social, emotional, psychological needs of children and youth. They have to prepare teachers to operate in learning spaces where they don't even know about AI because there's no internet. Also, many of the learning spaces into which we send our teachers, they're hot, they're dirty, they smell, they have no water. I remember one young student who was in our B.Ed program. She went out on teaching practice and she came back and said, Dr. Gentles, you taught me all these things about how to plan a lesson, but you never prepared me for the fact that I was going to feel disgusted when I smelled that child who just stank of urine. Like, how do you prepare teachers for that? But that's the reality. You know, do we just work on teaching them empathy, or do we just work on teaching them how to teach the ABCs? These are important questions. And then, of course, remember, there's the reality that we have a lot of violence in our society. School communities are violent. There's crime and violence in the school and outside the school. These are real contextual challenges that we have to think about as we put our minds to how will teacher education look in the future in Jamaica. And then, of course, we have the contextual realities where our administrators, policymakers, a lot of them don't really understand teaching or teacher education even more. They make all these policies, but they really have no idea what it is they're planning for. Decision-making is informed by political goals rather than research-informed educational visioning. And then there's the big problem that we are facing in teacher education, and will continue to face, the diminishing attractiveness of teaching as a profession, which is leading to low recruitment and the serious problem of attrition out of our classrooms by teachers who are migrating to go to teach in foreign countries or are just leaving the classroom. We saw a huge attrition of teachers out of classrooms after the pandemic experience, and it continues. And as a matter of fact, UNESCO tells us that we are short 44 million teachers globally. We want to catch up by the year 2030. Because the SDG goals are supposed to, come to an end at that point. There's no way that's going to happen, right? And we know even in our teacher education institutions, the numbers have been plummeting. So through teacher education, how do we change that? How do we fix that? So I'm saying that what we need to do is start envisioning. Sorry, have I lost the mic? No? I'm still there? Okay. Envisioning quality teacher education for Jamaica. So one of the strategies that we have been using is what we call benchmarking, where we look at best practices in other jurisdictions, we look at what we can learn from them, and we try to see how what we're doing measures up or compares to what is happening in countries that are high-performing, that have high-performing education sectors. And one of the leaders in this type of work is Linda Darling-Hammond out of the US, and she has been working collaboratively with teacher educators across the globe to look at the kind of policies that are governing education and teacher education in those countries. And there's some important commonalities that they've identified that I think are instructive. So one of them that strikes me most is that she suggests that quality teacher education, when you're planning it and designing it, you have to do it as just one element in a system with a strong continuum of support built to prepare, retain, and develop high-quality teachers. So it can't be that we're fixing teacher education over there, we're fixing early childhood, we're fixing high school, we're fixing primary school. No, it has to be cohesively conceptualized and thought out. And teacher education, as part of that, has to be just one element. It's a whole continuum of thinking. So we're thinking systemically about what we need to do, improve education, and then we think about how can teacher education be a part of this. So we know that high-performing systems, one thing they have in common is that they invest in the profession of teaching. And I don't mean that they raise their salaries so that they're almost at the level of their counterparts in the private sector. No, that's not what we mean by investing in the profession of teaching. It means, sometimes, you start paying them from the moment that they enter Teachers College. And I know my friends at the back will think that's a wonderful idea, In many high-performing countries, as a young person enters teacher training, they are paid the salary of a teacher. So from the very start, they are thought, they consider themselves professionals. And in high-performing jurisdictions, that investment leads teachers to see themselves as important people, to see themselves as expert educators who can be trusted to make judgments about practice and how to improve it. They involve their teachers in thinking through problems in education. They don't just think about it in the ministry and then go tell the teachers what they're going to do differently. And also high-performing systems, they build structures that enable teachers to use their expertise to support other teachers and to participate in policy making. And all of this leads to making teaching a more attractive profession. That helps them then to become more thoughtful and creative, and we have realized also supports recruitment and retention. Because there are some countries where they don't have a problem recruiting people into the teaching profession. As a matter of fact, they go out and they recruit the best and the brightest. And in some countries, like Finland, for example, it is harder to get into teacher training institutions than it is to get into medicine or law or engineering because of the value that they place on their teaching profession. In Singapore, I understand from a colleague of mine, the government invests heavily in branding teaching. They talk about how wonderful teachers are on the radio and they big them up and they just make teaching seem so exciting and something that you need to do as part of being a good Singaporean. We need to do more of that. And all of that needs to be embedded and infused into how we do teacher education. So, of course, it's really important that we help our teacher educators to model good practice. We know that this is the key to breaking that cycle of teacher-centric practices. Just go on a little here. So, my last point here about how we need to envisage teacher education in the future is that I really believe that the notion of indigenization is something that we need to think about very carefully. So I'm thinking, rather than talking about indigenizing Caribbean education, I'm thinking about indigenizing quality teacher education in Jamaica and perhaps by extension in the Caribbean. And I think, and some of my colleagues spoke to this earlier, and for me this has to do with embracing and including our own understandings and knowledge of what works in our classrooms and what does not work when preparing Jamaican teachers. I know I spoke about benchmarking, and that's good, but we can't always just be looking at what's happening abroad and say, wow, that's wonderful, and just say, because we're not doing it, what we're doing is not good. So even that lovely graphic there of the OECD compass of that wonderful child of the future, maybe that's not for us. Maybe we don't want that type of child. Maybe we don't need that type of child for our national development, I mean, I can't really imagine a Jamaican child going home and talking about being a co-agent or someone that practices co-agency with their parents, It's just not part of our culture, right? So, But there is so much that we know that we haven't really thought about valuing that I think we really need to think about very carefully. And I think it's because we have been socialized to undervalue our own knowledge, especially our knowledge about the practicing of teaching. And this is really a negation of ourself and our voice. And it speaks to that legacy of the hegemony of post-colonial ideologies that often frame policy-making about education and frame the way we think of ourselves as teachers. It's not healthy for us. But it's going to require a lot of courage, because for us to suggest that we invite teachers and teacher educators to start conversations around how we're going to do teacher education better, to invite them to be primary actors, Mr. Isaacs, you know that wouldn't go down well, right? Not at all. Okay, right? But we need to reach that point. We need, instead of teacher educators, instead of teacher education being guided by policymakers, it needs to be guided by those who are actually engaged and on the ground. It's a very important point, and it's really hard to wrap our minds around, but it is very important. So what are some of the strategies? You know, we always like to talk about our recommendations, and I have to pump those in. I'm a good academic, right? So I think what I talked about in terms of ideology critique, I have always said this is a really important tool, and I think it's something that we could develop and, you know, teach those skills to our teachers to help them be able to reflect, not just reflect, Dr. McCallum, as we always teach our teachers to do, but to reflect critically. There's a big difference between the two, so that's very important. And then, God forbid, I thought long and hard about bringing this in, and I thought I'm not going to go further, but I have to mention it. We need to tackle deliberately the tensions around the discussions and advocacy for granting official status to our Jamaican language. I feel very strongly about this because I know from my experience going into classrooms that when I see a student teacher teaching and they're having a lot of difficulty, the minute they forget that I'm there examining them and they relax and they launch into, you know, use their Jamaican language, they're different people. They teach so well, they're comfortable, the children are engaged. I've always thought, you know, this is really something that we have to think about carefully. But there's so much tension around this issue. But it's something that we have to do. And also, we need to really start identifying and dialoguing honestly about what are the realities in our Jamaican experience that are hindering us. Is it that we really are not as good as we think we are in the practice of teacher education? Can we own that, and can we be willing and open to learn to do things better? But I think also there's a lot of things that we do that we teach our student teachers as informal knowledge, right? But we need to maybe think about them, document, formalize, and perhaps even infuse them deliberately into our teacher ed programs. So for example, this is one that, just to mention quickly, something I'm always intrigued by that happens when I speak to teachers or when I go out and look at teachers teaching, is this concept of managing. When you ask teachers, you know, how are you doing, or tell me about your experiences when you first started teaching, they never talk about, well, I improved the cognitive or metacognitive abilities of my children, or I did this or that with them. No, they talk a lot about the fact that they learned to manage. They managed, and they feel so good that they were managing. And what do they mean by managing? Well, they mean that they found ways to mitigate the impact on their children of poor reading skills, social and emotional problems, the fact that the kids had no lunch money, that they were suffering from poor hygiene, and that there were no resources to support them. The teachers spend an inordinate amount of time improving emotional and physical conditions, which they see as a way of improving the learning readiness of the children they have to teach. And I think this is something so Jamaican and so important that it's an example of the indigenization of our knowledge for teaching practices that we need to start thinking about as we design a quality teacher education in Jamaica. So coming to the end now, I think I want to ask, just a few more points about, now I've spoken at length, I've painted this lovely picture, of what can be, why it isn't the way it should be, and made some suggestions and recommendations. But we need to ask ourselves, are these real possibilities, or is this just Dr. Gentles speaking from the ivory tower of academia, painting a pie in the sky that is never going to come to fruition? If you had asked me this question 10, 15 years ago, I would say yes. We all go to conferences and we make all these recommendations, and it is a lot of pie in the sky. We wish and hope that things will improve, but they don't always, because sometimes the spirit of the times is not right. But right now, at this moment, I think the spirit of the times is right, and I'll tell you why. First of all, if we look at the global conversations about teachers and teaching, where there's a lot of concern about the shortage of teachers that we face globally, there has been a shift, because they're beginning to realize, those out there, that perhaps the only way we can really get teachers to want to come back into the profession is if we suddenly start treating them right. So there's a lot of talk, like words like, we need to advocate to dignify the teaching profession, to diversify, to valorize the teaching profession. These are not words that we ever used to hear. And they're emphasizing the importance of improving working conditions for teachers, enhancing their professional development, supporting them, and increasing their involvement in decision making. So if that's the sort of global discourse, and we always are willing and ready to tap into that, then maybe the spirit of the times is right. We need to also start talking that way about our teachers, because that will help us in terms of planning and thinking about a better teacher education in the future. We also have the talk of reparation. That's rich and ripe in the air and in this room, because we have reparation talk happening right here in these hallowed halls. The CARICOM has a 10-point plan for reparations, and reparation is actually being taught as a subject in our CXC syllabi. So it's there, it's ready. And there's a strong connection between the talk of reparations and the talk about decolonizing, deconstructing post-colonial ideologies. So as I say, 15 years ago, or 22 years ago when I started talking about this, people at conferences nodded their heads, oh, this is lovely. But lay people are like, that doesn't sound, kind of a bit out to left field. But right now, at this moment, if we tag along to that whole reparation spirit, I think it's something that we can utilize to advocate for some of the things that we need to do to change teacher education. And also, just to say that I'm really happy also that words that echo sentiments about improving teacher agency, autonomy, they're out there in the public space, the Jamaican public space, which is wonderful, because I really believe that if we don't give teachers autonomy and agency, we're never going to change anything, because it's teachers who we need to get to drive the change. I was very happy the other day to see a statement by Dr. Mark Smith, the president of the JTA, in May 2025, he was criticizing the JTC bill, but he was saying that the JTA will continue to advocate unapologetically for teachers' rights to have agency and administration over their profession, like other professions do. I just thought this was so good, so forward-thinking, because even though the sentiment has been there, but the articulation of this concept has not. And so it's really good that we're thinking about that in the public space. And then finally, and Dr. Roof will be happy for this, we need to we really need to help to professionalize our teacher educators for many of the reasons that I spoke about. And just to say that the resources are available there, because we have a Master of Arts in Teacher Education and Teacher Development program that's about over 30 years old, was revised several years ago, but it contains in it a program that can help to certify our teacher educators. Many of our teacher educators have done these courses and are absolutely thrilled with the sort of added confidence and, competence that it gives them. So I think I've said all I have to say. I thank you so much. I hope that what I have shared gives you a little food for thought, has planted a few seeds. I see Dr. Isaacs with Mr. Oh my God, yeah, see? Mr. Isaacs in his thinking position, which I know well. So I'm hoping that some of what I've said will be carried home with him and into his workspace. But I do thank all of you for coming, my family, my friends, thank you, my colleagues. It's so wonderful to see good faces. When I was preparing, my husband said, "You're lucky because, as Custis, he has to go give greetings to people he's never seen before. So he's always worried, are they going to be receptive? But he says, you're lucky. You're going to go to a place, you know everybody there, and they're going to be nice to you, so you don't have to worry, right? But I do hope that, you've enjoyed and that something of what I've said has made sense to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carol Hordatt Gentles. Thank you very much. Let's give her another round of applause. How can we indigenize? How can we, the concept of managing and having, for learning readiness, the ideologies, I have some questions about that. Preservation of our own indigenous knowledge systems, future-proofing. The AI child I'm struggling with. But somebody says it's here. Yeah, a lot of food for thought. But I am not the question and answer person. I will hand over to Mr. Miguel Eisen, who will open the floor to questions. So please.
Good evening, everyone. All righty. Just to make the connections a bit more full circle, earlier as Dr. Gentle was speaking, she referenced Grenada several times. And I thought, who else should represent Grenada but somebody from Grenada, right? So the circle comes, even more so. All right, so we have about 10 minutes max for questions. A lot was said. Do we have a... Wow, and already shot up. So we'll take maybe about 3 or 4 persons with questions. Ms. Brown has a mic at the back. She'll come to you. So, Karif. All right, we have. So when you stand, please, just say your name, your affiliation will be nice, and then get to the question quickly, right? 1 question, Karif.
I will try. Good evening, everyone. Excellent presentation, Dr. Gentles. So I'm Karif Clark, and in this capacity, I'm a student. So I do have a question around the indigenous component of your presentation, Doc. And I referenced an article that was published last year in the Gleaner entitled Splitting Hairs. And in one of our teachers' colleges, in the grooming policy, in the student handbook, it reads, according to the article, for males that is, no cornrows, plaits, or twisting are allowed. It also states that hair should be a maximum length of ½ inch and properly combed. What are then the implications for black Jamaican young men who are not well off going to the barber weekly but who have great potentials to become exceptional teachers. And if I may ask a question on the technical side of teacher education now, looking at how do we ensure robust teacher education when there is seemingly a laissez-faire approach to curriculum reform in teacher education?
Sure. Okay, so thank you, Karif. And Karif is also one of my PhD students. So two very bright people here putting me on the spot. So the first question, well, Karif, I think the response to that is very subjective. My own views are that people should be allowed to, dress in a way that makes them feel culturally okay. And obviously I don't think that people should be coming to school dirty or, unkempt, but I really feel this is something that we have to think about very carefully. How do we value students? How do we show them that we value them? Right? And when we deny them the opportunity to wear their hair in a way that makes them feel good about themselves, that's a problem. I have a lady who comes to clean for me sometimes, and she had a son who, during the pandemic, he's very artistic, and he has his hair in locks, and he didn't want to go back to school because during the pandemic he was finally able to grow his hair the way he wanted it. He didn't want to go back to school because he knew they were going to give him a lot of problems about it. So, but again, it's a very contentious issue, but that's my particular view on it. And could you just remind me of the second question? You were...
The laissez-faire approach to curriculum reform in teacher education.
Right. So you're saying it's laissez-faire? Why?
The perceived... Sorry. So the perceived notion that teacher education curriculum goes on for years without proper reformation, which is why there is that discrepancy with what's happening at the lower levels compared to teacher education.
Right. Well, I think that goes back to the problem that I indicated, that a lot of the curriculum reform or the framing of it is done by people who are not actually on the ground. They're not the teacher educators themselves and the teachers. And the bureaucracy, there's so much bureaucracy. And a lot of the challenges we've had, I know with the publicly funded teacher education institutions, is that the whole process has been so clumsy. At first, the Joint Board of Teacher Education had to be helping them, then they didn't help them, then they were asked to do it on their own, but without the requisite training for how to develop curricula. And there's just a lot of, challenges swirling around. And it takes us a long time to develop curricula and to test them, and that's wrong. We need to change that, but I don't know if that answers your question. It's not definitive, but thanks.
Thank you. Paul Ivy. I work at UTech, but I'm a UE graduate, my undergraduate degree. So I thank you for the lecture, Dr. Hordatt Gentles. And I must say that I got the invitation yesterday, and I was very happy that my schedule made it possible to attend, because I am saying that it was worth it. And I took copious notes for a self-serving reason, because I'm actually writing a book on the education system, a portrait of the education system, because it is the only industry in which I've worked, quote unquote, for the last 30 plus years. And so I'm steeped in the education system, and that's why. You mentioned the kind of sense of deja vu as to where we are now, after, and you alluded to your paper that was highlighted there as well. I liked how you touched the point of the indigenization aspect, and you spoke to it as well. And then you ended on the note, now is the time, the spirit of the time. And my question is, dare we hope? Dare we have hope in the sense that, the deja vu factor? And one of my colleagues, Robert Winter, who's probably known to some of you, he reminds me that hope is not a strategy. So now it begs the question, and here I'm coming to our fraternity. With the universities. The university, my university, your university, spoke about the MA in teacher education and development. How do we come out of the ivory tower and walk the talk? That's my question.
Good question. Well, it's kind of a challenge in our Jamaican context because, you know, everybody who is in every institution was a teacher, and everybody knows everyone else. So even though we're ivory tower, we're still on the ground because we're working with this board and this school and that school. So I think there's a kind of synergy that exists that may help with that. But I think also it goes back to the idea that we need to give our teachers and teacher educators more autonomy, because academics think about knowledge in one way, but the people on the ground who have the experience, that experiential knowledge, is really very important. I think much more important in terms of developing policy that will frame, you know, how we're going to practice and change teacher education. You know, one of the things that always worries me is when we keep saying our teachers must do research, and then the government gives all, you know, the teachers' colleges money to do research. But I don't see where that is going to help as much as just getting teachers to share and collate and document what they do, rather than going out and designing, you know, a formal study. There's a difference, you know. It's that valuing that experiential, anecdotal work that you can collate reliably in a research project, you know. So I think changing that mindset is important. Well, I hope we're going to do more than hope. As you say, hope is not a strategy, but I think the time is now. We have to be strong advocates. I know the School of Education is, you know, but maybe even more cohesiveness in the way we talk about it, you know. You have some colleagues at UTech who are amazing teacher educators, but we know them as friends, but we never really get together to talk about the issues and the challenges. So, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Just before Mr. Isaacs come, I want to have the students to be on standby. Can one of you ask a question shortly? Just, it will be nice to come full circle, yeah? So we have maybe 2 more questions, one from Mr. Isaacs here, and then there, and then hopefully one of the students, right? Okay, great. Mr. Isaacs.
Thank you. Howard Isaacs. I stand as a teacher educator, principal. Based on my career and the projection of my life, as Paul said, being in education, this is the only place we have been for the most part. But one of the challenges I've had over the years is where government comes in, where the policymakers comes in, and how they work with the colleges, how they work with the institutions to bring about the change. In your presentation, you spoke at length about the indigenization, but to a large extent, I don't know if it is something that you, and please don't take me hard on this, but I was hoping that you would share with us what are some of the strategies that we can develop so that the government can be more involved in the process and recognizing more our role as teacher educators and as teachers in the development of policy and change. Because that's why, for example, we only had one of the recommendations out of the earlier report, and this report, the Patterson report, speaking to it and saying much has not happened because there has not been a coming together of the minds to bring about the change. How are we going to do that? Because when you look at the government's operation now, and government here doesn't mean PNP or JLP, it means government, to a large extent, they have not come together. We have not been having the type of dialogue that we require to move the system forward. So if we're going to talk about future-proofing and getting ready to go out there, what do you suggest we do different?
Thank you for that question. But to me, it all goes back to the notion of preparing our teachers and teacher educators for advocacy and agency. And these are skills that we can actually teach them, and also teacher leadership. Because, we have a course that we teach in that, and teachers are always like blown away because they never knew that they could be teacher leaders. But I think we have to change the mindset that as teachers in the classroom and teacher educators in the teacher education college classroom, that we really don't have that much to say. We have to teach them that they have a lot to say and that they can advocate and that what they have to say is important. I mean, in some high-performing jurisdictions, for example, Finland, they've created a system where the teachers themselves have the right and authority to make any suggestion they want to, and it is validated, it is acknowledged. They can call the textbook publishers and make a suggestion for something to change in the textbook. It's a cultural thing, and it doesn't mean that they're perfect, they have no problems, but that's our problem, because we have been socialized to think that we're teachers, we come from that poor working class background, many of us. We really don't have anything to say. What we have to say is not that important. So that's how I see it.
But I just want to follow quickly.
Sure.
One of the challenges, though, Doc, with that is, for example, I come from a union perspective now. I come from a union perspective now, and then when the union comes in and advocates, because I'm an advocate for education, teacher education in particular, what I want to see happening is from the state to have that mindset to see us as we want to see ourselves and give us the opportunity to come in to bring about the change. Because if they feel challenged many times. They feel challenged by what we bring to the table. You mentioned Dr. Mark Smith a while ago. This is a thinking that we have from a union perspective where we want to be in the room. And that's why, for example, the JTC bill, we have a challenge with it because of how it was developed. And even though we have indicated to the government, listen, this is where we are with it. We are not against it. We want to be professionals. We want to be seen in the light. But yet still it seems as if they want to do something beyond the ordinary, outside on the back door, to make the change happen. So we are there, but we need to get them to have that mindset to see us being there and having a significant say. So I just want to make that point. But I hear you. I hear you. Thank you.
So just to add, I read this very interesting paper the other day that talked about the notion of ideology governance. And it talked about this in the sense that we should be moving towards a situation where all these different stakeholders are able to come to the table and critique their own ideologies, what drives their thinking, and lay it on the table, and then use that to come to some sort of consensus around what the end result should be of their deliberations. But we have to talk about it. We have to articulate it. We have to advocate for it. So, it's an interesting concept. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So 2 more questions. We'll take question from here and then one from St. Joseph's Teachers College.
Good evening, everyone. I am a trained teacher, but I left the classroom many, many years ago. But I still have a vested interest in anything that has to do with education. Now, all of us would have gone to schools where you can immediately identify some really excellent teachers. And many of them would have so influenced you and would have had such an impression upon you that you end up choosing careers related to what they would have taught you. But my question is there space for these wonderful teachers in shaping the profession? You're talking about the indigenization of the profession, but oftentimes we see these people, they come and they are overlooked. Not even the very schools they are in tap into the skill sets that they have to help to improve the quality of what is being delivered. Is there a space for these people at all in what you're talking about, the indigenization of the profession?
Thank you for that question. 1 minute.
Thank you for that really good question. I think there is a lot of space for that. And I guess informally, those are the people who become mentors, who do a lot for younger beginning teachers coming into the system, which is a very important activity. But in terms of, thinking more systemically, there are countries, for example, Australia, where the teaching standards that they have are aligned with the notion of professional development. And so teachers, they don't become like a master teacher just because they're a good teacher. They can become a master teacher because what they do in practice reflects their commitment to the teaching profession. So the idea of mentorship and developing those who are less experienced is ingrained in how they think about themselves professionally. So to me, that would be one way of doing that. So it's creating that space, but they're also getting rewarded for it. Because no matter how lovely a person you are, we want to be validated. We want to get rewards. So that reward system is embedded in the way that the standards are set up so that they feel that they've done something for the teaching profession, but they get promoted for it. So that's one idea. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we'll take the final question from St. Joseph's Teachers College. Yes?
Good evening, Dr.
Good evening.
Gentles.
Yes.
I heard you made mention in one of your stories that when you would make your class visits or your school visits, that a student teacher would be trying to use standard English and so on, and then when they got all relaxed and was on their own, and they used the Jamaican dialect, that they were, much more effective at that point in time. My question is you made mention, to be fair, that timing, and this was a perfect timing for certain things, but I'm asking you, Dr. Gentles, do you actually think that this is the time, if the atmosphere is ready for us as a teacher body to take our Jamaican dialect into as you spoke about the future, what was that term? Future-proofing. The future-proofing children and so on, because for me, I've noticed that most parents expect that, especially when they send their children to some schools or a certain caliber of schools, they expect them to be, so that is my question.
Well, yeah.
What
Thank
place
you.
has Patois?
Yes, well, thank you. But as I did say, this is a highly contentious issue. I think that we can answer on an emotional level, a subjective level, and people have very different views. My particular way of thinking about it is that perhaps, even going back to the colonial era when everything British was, considered to be wonderful, and anything not British was not wonderful, that maybe we still have that kind of lingering idea that not doing everything the British way is wrong. Now, there are many reasons why people do not accept the argument that we should, legitimize the Jamaican language for use in classrooms, and they're all valid reasons. But I don't have the answers. I can just give you my opinion, and I think that if I can find a way for a teacher to teach well, no matter what it takes, then if that's what needs to be done, if I need to allow them, not allow, but I need to encourage them to use the Jamaican language, then that's what I need to do, because at the end of the day, I want them to teach the students in a way that makes them thrive. It's, right. But again, as I say, that's my particular opinion. But what I was advocating for is for us to put it out in the open, for it to be part of the dialogue and the debate when we're talking about reforming teacher education. But thank you for your question, and I can see I feel in my bones you're a gentleman we're going to see at the School of Education one day, right? Not so? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So while that was the last question in here, when we go outside while we're eating, you can always approach Dr. Gentles. Part of the advocacy, right? Teacher's voice. Find your voice, and don't be afraid to maybe use social media to promote your ideas, right? Whether it's TikTok, whether it's IG, or Smile Jamaica, or the newspaper. Keep the discussion going, right? Advocate for what you do. Doctor, you want it?
Okay, thank you. I just want to honor persons who are online, and Michelle 25 says, also I think that while paying student teachers is a good idea, it might be better to pay for their tuition and offer a stipend for them to study as they do with the training of I'm hearing some applause from St. Joseph's Teachers College. Just to say, I'll read two more. Just to say AI and the internet don't always go hand in hand. Highway 2000 or whatever it is called has several AI voice-activated support systems that do not necessarily rely on the internet. Okay, from Dr. Agbola, this is an excellent presentation, Dr. Gentles. It powerfully underscores the need to revolutionize teacher education and to restore the sense of worth and dignity that teachers deserve. And I will end there, and now we are going to be treated to some wonderful music by Miss Judine Ricketts. So we can use our voices to speak, we can use our voices to sing.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I'll be singing today. I'm a bit nervous, I'm not sure why, but we'll get into it. I also do hope you enjoy, all right? I didn't catch that. Okay, so the song is One Moment in Time by Whitney Houston. Yeah. Okay, so in the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Just to kill some time, I work at the university in Faculty of Engineering. I used to be a part of the Humanities and Education department. I'm an admin assistant. I am majoring in Entertainment and Cultural Enterprise Management. That is also under the Institute of Cultural Studies. It's under Humanities and Education. I'm still not far. I'm 26 years of age. And I do like to sing. Yes. Each day I live, I want to be a day to give the best of me. I'm only one, but not alone. My finest day is yet unknown. I broke my heart for every gain, to taste the sweet. I face the pain, I rise and fall, yet through it all, this much remains. I want one moment in time, when I'm more than I thought I could be, when all of my dreams are a beat away, and the answers are all up to me. Give me one moment in time, when I'm racing with destiny. Then in that one moment of time, I will feel eternity. I live to be the very best. I want it all, no time for less. I'm laying the plans, now lay the chance here in my hands. I want one moment in time, when I'm more than I thought I could be, when all of my dreams are a heartbeat away, and the answers are all up to me. Give me one moment in time, when I'm racing with destiny. Then in that one moment of time, I will feel eternity. Oh, you're a winner for a lifetime, if you seize that one moment in time. Make it shine. Give me one moment in time, when I'm more than I thought I could be, when all of my dreams are a heartbeat away, and the answers are all up to me. Give me one moment in time, when I'm racing with destiny. Then in that one moment of time, I will feel, I will be free. Oh, I will be free.
One moment in time, and also the spirit of the time. Right? Lovely. And now, at this time, we'll ask Professor the Honorable Errol Miller to give his remarks.
Madam Master of Ceremonies, Dean, Dean Edward Scarr, Professor Carmel Roof, the husband of the guest speaker, Custis Gentles, the Honorable Peter Phillips, and then the family of Dr. Gentles, Hordatt Gentles. I'm going to refrain from any commentary on the lecture, the excellent lecture, which was provocative and prophetic. Seen in the future, people are going to be students and so on. I'm going to pick up on the theme of the continuity of change as it took place. So I have to tell the dean and the director of the school, this is the first time since I arrived on the campus of the university when I was 19 years old, just turned 19, that the persons in leadership was not anybody I taught or taught me, and a total new generation. That, Professor Roof, you could have thought that my life showed some indication of purpose, of discipline, which reminded you somewhat of Paul. It must be that intuitively you didn't listen to the people who said all of the contradictions of my life are hypocritical. But you saw me on my knees, praying each day that I might live out that gospel in which I truly believe. I've never been a scholar, been a servant who believes that one's life must be lived to a greater purpose, despite your failings, your faults, and all of that. I also must say that this is the 14th biennial lecture. By sheer mathematics, it means that this lecture was established 27 years ago, and you have continued it. I see Dr. Rainford and many of my colleagues that were here, and it means that it had lasted to a new generation. So there is a continuity. Dr. Gentles, you listed some of the greats of our faculty. I'm in the next generation down. You see, the first generation were the stars, inclusive of those you have mentioned, Professor Aubrey Phillips, Professor John Figueroa, Professor Laurie Reed. But we have to also mention Gwen Bedimer, Dr. Gwen Bedimer, Professor Reg Murray, D.R.B. Grant, and a whole set of scholars who had conquered the world in recognition, and the university had gathered into the fold. And they somewhat saw in me what I didn't know was in me. And I owe each of them. So comes when you're continuing that tradition we're going, I have to tell you that when I joined the faculty of the Department of Education, teaching department, at age 26, there was no assistant lecturer. So I have to say, I hope you forward up the times, because if you were in the faculty, you should have had some experience and so on that gave you not the initial position. And that you are continuing it, I fit with that. I would also immediately like to give an apology for the fact that my wife, Dr. Sharon Miller, is not here this evening. We left Jamaica at the same time to come back at the same time and for her to be present. But she picked up what has been diagnosed as a virus. She didn't give me all of it. She gave me sufficient to show association, but not sufficient for the doctors to conclude that I couldn't travel. And then, more than that, she gave me permission to leave her sick. So, by graciousness, she is not here. I just point out that to you. There has always been in me a rebel. Everybody is celebrating Jimmy Cliff, but the rebel in me, that's one of my favorite songs, that the rebel in me, because I have never accepted those negative comments by those who have succeeded and feel superior and begin to put down those who come after them. You see, I never forget that when I graduated from this university and got my master's, sentiment by one of the most influential social commentators of the Gleaner was to speak of us as semi-literates. And I've always lived with something on my shoulder saying, I am going to show that I am going to stay here, serve here, and be equal to any in the world. Because we are not inferior. And this mantle of inferiority that people want to put on us, what we don't do is we don't talk back. You see, if you have never taught in school, how do you know? Because you went to school, that makes you an educator. I believe what we need to do is to talk back to these people who are telling us, who have been through the system at all of its levels. You see, the first thing you have to do, more important than anything, is to care about the students you teach at any level, to want to help them to find the best in themselves, and to forget all of those other things. So I'm just going to tell you that. I've been in the system, but there is a rebel in me that has not allowed me to conform to the system. Now, how does it connect Dr. Gentles and me and the school? You see, there was that discipline called teacher education. I grew up with the field. So I was a teacher. I was a lecturer in science education. In fact, my first job in university was in the Faculty of Natural Sciences in the Department of Botany. I was a demonstrator. In fact, when I decided to accept the post, or was offered the post and accepted it, they said, what are you doing going to that place? Education. You have no future there. But you see, I was not following scholarship. I was following call. And what I found was very interesting. Was confusing at first. People would take 2 months to define education. In natural science, we'd have dealt with it in 15 minutes. Create a hypothesis, descend on the methodology, set up the criteria with which you're going to go, and do it. This business of, I couldn't understand it. It confused me. So we come to this great field of education, which we grew up with. I grew up with the field. So come to the point of the aging educator, and comes to the school this person who has formerly been trained in teacher education with a PhD in teacher education. So this old fogey had to now try to make sure you're not letting down the side. And so it's interesting that as we began to relate, and she was the second marker of the course that I taught. And I had to make sure that the content was right up there, you know, I mean. And so she said she was beside me, and I was the one who was intimidated by by this young, vibrant, properly trained. And I was to make sure that I did not give away the field by these generous markings, you know. So I have confessed, Dr. Gentles, you kept me on my toes. And then, as she said, we worked on a project. My last project I did was in Grenada. And it was interesting how it worked. My colleague from Barbados and St. Lucia, Dr. Ford, George Ford, he and I visited. And then we went through the whole process, you know how it is, of interviews, focus group discussions, town halls, from morning till night. And you have to listen to a lot of people, all with their own truth. And then in the evening, I would go back to the hotel. I would take out the latest gadget, which would allow me to transfer to her all of the notes taken from the date for her to put it into the programs that do the qualitative analysis. You understand? So we're right up there in using the technology in which she's not in Grenada. We are there, but we are informing her, and she's putting it in the thing. Now, understand this. I'm from a natural science background, so my original field is from quantitative analysis. And I've discovered that when you're going to start to make instruments up from the field, it's the open-ended question that gives you the richest. And therefore, qualitative is important. But here comes somebody who is not only proficient, but expert in the qualitative thing, and she's analyzing it. After that, I said, you have had your full run. Give it up. So to hear now that Dr. Hordatt Gentles is retiring and has retired. What is that? I tell you, I found retirement to be doing more than when you are active. The only thing is you're not getting paid. But there is a glorious part to it. And I hope that as we see this transfer, because Custis, you're going to want her out the house after about 6 months of not doing them. Because with the mind that she has, the vitality that is there, she will not be able to contain it in terms of housekeeping things. I also want to say to the School of Education, the Faculty of Humanities and Education, that you could have decided to continue the biennial lecture after we were hit by Melissa, who toyed with our minds for days in a part that is unique, and then decide to hit us, and you decide to hold this lecture, tells me that there is a possibility that it may go on for a little more. And I hope that for all of us, and in these times, and I want to identify with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Isaacs. You see, it's one thing to talk about all the great concepts of education. It's another thing to really care and to compensate and to recognize our teachers. Let us all understand that the tradition of education and of teachers that we belong in the colonial strategy accorded teachers a low place. There are other traditions that did the opposite. It's going to take us time because we are still a young country. It has always boggled my mind as to how would you expect that people who have dominated you for over 300 years, can you expect that your future is in terms of following them by their manpower, their materials, and their methodologies and their models? You got to be insane. At the same time, to throw out the baby with the bathwater does not make sense. It is easy to mash up things. You build it for years, and it takes a fortnight to tear it down. So the challenge is, how do we conserve that from which is from the past, that has worth? Don't tell me that the colonizers never left us with anything of worth. They did in some areas, but they didn't in others. And one of the things that has been true of teachers, and I'm very much aware that I'm in that category. You see, when you're young and you're in the field, you're no good. Semi-literates produced by this university and others. But when you have retired, you suddenly become the great teachers of the past. I have actually traced it back to the middle of the 19th century. It is a pattern. So when I hear teachers in the field being criticized and all of that, I don't accept it no matter who it comes from. That's not true. It's part of the cycle. And let me I'm making a last comment, and I know that it will get me into some trouble. But trouble has always followed me. And by the grace of God, it is this. The teaching profession at this time in Jamaica, in 2025, going to 26, is the best qualified teaching profession we have ever had. in terms of formal qualifications. The managers in our schools are the best managers. And you expect that you're going to get some persons who are from us in the ministry suddenly giving us a prescription to work. That doesn't make sense. And we need to ask some serious questions. Is the cost of managing the child in terms of the cost of the overheads, how does that compare to the cost of instructing the child? I believe many people, if you go back and look to all those great things, people have modeled us on business, but education is not just a business. Modeled us on the military, but education is not an army. Modeled us on all kinds of things. But education is the thing that helps us to be formed. Indoctrination is an essential part of education. It is how you do it. What you must never do is to alter the spirit of the child, such that when that child comes to be able to make decisions for themselves, they will not be able to do it. You see, you have to have something to react to and to change. And I am very confident that this young country of ours will find our own way in this world, because the Caribbean and Jamaica is a distinctive civilization whose history does not belong in the past and will come to fruition in the future in our own image by God's grace. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. And what I remember, education is the thing that helps us to be formed. Thank you, Prof. Miller. And this is the last time that you're seeing me, because now I will hand over to Ms. Georgette Delavante, who is the acting manager of the Joint Board of Teacher Education. This has been a joint effort between the School of Education and the Joint Board of Teacher Education. She will give the vote of thanks, and then we can not only use our mouths to speak or to sing, but also to eat. So welcome, Ms. Delavante.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fulcom. And good evening, colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight has been rich. It has been an excellent time well spent together. So it's both an honor and a privilege to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the Joint Board at the conclusion of the Biennial Errol Miller Lecture. This occasion has been special, not only because of the strength of its theme, but also because it brings us together in a shared celebration of scholarship, leadership, service to teacher education in the Caribbean. At the outset, we extend our sincere appreciation to our guest lecturer, Dr. Hordatt Carol Gentles. Beautiful, well done, clap her for me, please. Rich, thank you for accepting the invitation to deliver this year's Errol Miller Lecture. We thank you for sharing your time, your expertise, and your perspective with us this evening. And you engage beautifully with the theme, Teacher Education, Legacy, Global Imperatives, and Indigenization of the Caribbean Education. You have added depth to our ongoing conversations on this topic about future teacher preparation in our region, and we thank you for that. You have reminded us about the importance of legacy in the Caribbean teacher education. Our evolution is not accidental, but has been shaped by vision, by scholarship, and sustained commitment. This lecture series stands as a reminder that we are beneficiaries of that work and that we have a responsibility to steward it with care, with integrity, and with purpose. This evening would not have been possible without the dedication of the planning committee. Let's thank every member who sustained this forum for sharing a space for thoughtful engagement and dialogue. A special word of thank you very much. A special word of thanks is due to the administrative, the technical and support teams, whose professionalism and quiet efficiency contributed to the smooth execution of this event. We deeply appreciate you. All our distinguished guests, representatives of partner institutions, our colleagues across the educational system, we thank you. I want to give special thanks to Professor the Honorable Errol Miller. We honor you for your legacy, your contribution to teacher education. You have shined a bright light for someone just like me at the Joint Board to have an opportunity to stand in the light of your glory. We thank you for all that you have done. Thank you for a wonderful evening spent together, and we give our thanks. It has been a blessing. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.